we serve. Welcome to our show. Sit back and enjoy. We will talk with people about their stories. With our host, Ramona, we're ready to start. Together we serve, together we serve, together we serve, together we serve. Welcome to our show. Together we serve. Welcome to our show. Sit back and enjoy. Education, inspiration, motivation for business and life. With our host, Ramona, we're ready to start.
My name's Tom Wickham, or as a lot of people know me, TJ. I live in Perth, Western Australia, and I am a current member of the men's national hockey team, the Kookaburras, and I'm also a business coach with the fabulous team at Magnificence. I first came across Bodhi at WA Leaders. I heard of him through one of my colleagues, Akram Sabah, and it kind of just happened to be that I was sitting next to him on the table that day, and we had a nice conversation, and he presented, and I really engaged with what he had to say and in his presentation. And then from there, Bodhi reached out to me, and we connected firstly via Zoom, and now we've kept that relationship going. No, not at all. I'm a pretty open book. I'm someone that is always looking for better ways to do things or self-improving all the little things. And I didn't engage with Bodhi to necessarily try and figure out a problem. I engaged with Bodhi because I'm a big believer in putting a support network of people around you. And Bodhi's one of those people. After having a few conversations with him, I wanted to bring him on board to help me discover his world. And I think one of the big things that I've really engaged with Bodhi, which is just his world, is the ability to speed up my ability to get myself present. That's been a big shift for me, and that's been something that I've really enjoyed working with Bodhi on. Most definitely. I think the way I choose to show up just across the board in my day-to-day life, I think when you can mash your whole world as just being one thing together, as opposed to it being I go to work, I rock up as a hockey player, I rock up as a partner. I think when you're able to kind of get in the flow of just making yourself present as one, as a whole, I think that's when you're starting to really tap into optimal human performance. Absolutely. I think the speed in which you're able to bring yourself back to the present moment, I think that's been the biggest shift for me. Is you can get yourself in a bit of a bind, or you let other pressures drip feed into other areas of your life. And for me, the speed in which I'm able to now bring myself back to being where I am allows me to be in the moment that I'm in, as opposed to my head being somewhere else. So that is only going to benefit my clients when I'm on the pitch, my relationships, whether that's my partner or with anyone else that is in my circle. So I would say it's the speed in which I'm able to bring myself back and having some different tools or perspectives to get myself there. That's probably been the biggest shift and biggest value that I've had from Bodhi.
Welcome to Together We Serve TV show. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening and recording if that's what you're doing. I'm super excited because I met Bodhi months ago, maybe 6 months ago. We've stayed connected. We've shared some introductions. We talked right before the show, and the energy that comes out is magnificent. But he talks about feminine and masculine energy. Obviously, I'm a man, but I do cry. And he pointed that out to me when we first talked. I don't know if he remembers this, but yeah, you cry. I've cried on podcasts. I've cried on this TV show when I hear stories. We're just human, and that's what we do. So we're going to talk about this because it's important. Where you work, where you go to church, you're at a grocery store, restaurant, you're dealing with masculine and feminine energies all the time. But as a male, it's hard to deal with the female energy, and then vice versa, because they are different. Venus and Mars, the John Gray book just comes to mind. So with that being said, let's bring on our incredible guest. Welcome to the show, Bodhi Aldridge.
Thank you so much, Steve. And welcome to the listeners.
So I got to ask, that Tom Wickham, is he a football player?
It's actually hockey. So think of your ice hockey players. He's a national hockey player, field hockey over here, just been to the Olympics in Paris.
Field hockey. Okay, I was thinking ice hockey. I can't relate Australia because, by the way, this is an international show. He's in Australia, I think. He travels a lot. I'm like, how does ice? Maybe they do, but ice hockey in Australia? It's interesting. Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah.
Female masculine energy, I talked about right before on the monologue.
Yep.
It's difficult, but you make it easier. Talk about that.
Yeah, and I think if we chunk up a layer into leadership, and then we can maybe unpack how this dynamic plays out in leadership and what I mean by that. So, like yourself, like the listeners, I work with leaders across the globe, whether they're entrepreneurs, whether they're a mid-tier business, or whether they're a corporate. And fundamentally, the three layers of leadership are self-leadership, relational leadership, and systemic leadership. And I'll talk a bit more about those. But if we come back to a simple definition of leadership, is influence. So everybody effectively is a leader in the organization because everyone influences the system, yet there are formal and informal leadership roles. And what we know through the studies globally, studying organizations, individuals, the two keys to leadership are connection and direction. Every staff member I've worked with, every individual in organizations say, if I feel connected to my leader, my line manager, the business, the purpose, and I have clear direction, I'm a happy camper. And what's interesting with connection and direction, connection is the feminine energy and direction is the masculine energy. And so I just wanted to give that frame for any of the listeners going, how does this apply? How does this, influence me or influence my organization? Because this is clear. Yeah. And I question any of the listeners to reflect on who's the most impactful leader you've worked with. They felt a level of connection with that individual, that organization, and the expectations were clear. The direction was clear. If you can do that as a leader, as a parent, as a partner, happy days.
Game changer. You made a great point. We're all leaders. Home, church, whatever, our peers. Talk about, as somebody listening that's 8 to 5 or not the owner of the company, they're in the middle part of this staff employee base. How are they a leader amongst their peers?
Yeah. It's again, the simple definition, you can look at all the leadership books, is it's influence. Yeah. So if you're an employee in an organization, you are influencing that system. There's a great story, Steve, and because a lot of organizational change, often people think it's the top down. It's got to be the VP or the CEO. And I think it was Hush Puppy many, many years ago. And there was a middle manager in the organization, large organization, US organization. And he was involved in HR and recruitment. And he was African-American. And he kind of felt that it would be good to bring in more diversity in the business. And without any fanfare, without any hoo-ha, as he started to recruit, he was just aware of bringing in more diversity. Now, over 10 years, he transformed the culture of that business because he brought in people from different cultures, different backgrounds, not, having some big mandate and some big DEI policy or whatever. He just went, I can influence this. They're selected on their merit, but they're also selected on how do we increase the culture here. So any individual who's an 8 to 5, 9 to 5, if you just think of your circle of influence, downward, upward, your relationship with clients, your relationship with other stakeholders, your presence, and as Tom shared in that beautiful video, one of the things, connection starts with connection with self, which is all about how present am I. So if you're going to work every day and you're scattered and you're distracted and you're bouncing around, it's a very different influence you have on your team, on the stakeholders. And so, to answer your question, the three keys, to really anchor this in is embodied presence. How do I get more present, as Tom shared? What's my purpose? Whether it's 8 to 5, whether you're running a business, a lot of your guests talk about the why. And everybody has an impact. Like that example I used in Hush Puppy, he was clear. My purpose here is to increase the diversity in this organization. And the third is passion. How do I bring passion to my life, to my children, to my beloved, to my work? Every day, Steve, when you leave home, any of the listeners, there are 2 trains that leave your home. One is the resistance train, one is the flow train. And you can resist life, you can play the victim, you can have a pity party. I'm working for this organization and I don't like it, and blame and judgment. It's a choice. Or how do I get into flow? How do I embrace it? How do I be a servant leader? How do I lean in and be the best version of myself? And that's, as tricky as it is, I know a lot of the listeners may be struggling at the moment. Fundamentally, there is a choice there. Am I resisting or am I flowing?
Yeah, choice is great. I know I need to talk because I'm the host, but I could just shut up and listen to you for an hour. I learned so much. And it's very interesting about the influence. If it's 1 to 100 and your influence is 60 and you don't think you're a good leader, bump it up to 80. Increase your influence, basically, is what I'm saying. And you're closer towards a leader, whatever position you're in.
And your influence. When you walk into the room, and I ask any of the listeners, when you've walked in the room and somebody's really present, really magnetic, they've got that charisma, they've got that energy, and it's almost like they don't have to say a lot, but there's something about this person, I want to listen to them or be with them. That's influence. And that comes from bringing your attention back in and being present. More present with yourself, more connected with yourself. Remember, connection and direction. If you're connected with yourself, you'll be connected with your team member, with your, when I work with sales team, anyone who does sales, I see some salespeople, and, obviously sales can be a busy role, and often incentivized, and how do I close so many? And I do a little exercise, Steve, where I talk about, if you're a salesperson who's running from meeting to meeting to meeting, you're distracted, you're busy, you've got the paperwork, you've got the emails and things like that. How present and connected are you with the prospect? And in the little exercise, I ask any of the listeners, if you're in a position where someone's selling you something, if they're present, if they're connected, if they're listening, if you feel comfortable in their energy, the chances of buying from them just accelerate incredibly. And so again, it's influence starts with your presence and connection with self.
And it's interesting you say it that way, because people that pitch right away, you're not building an influence. You're just aggressively, right? How are you influencing people if you're pitching them? You don't even know who they are. How do you influence somebody if you don't know who you are, which leads to communication? We'll get into that. But another thing you said, which is so brilliant, purpose. And this rock star business guy, like you said, and I forget his name, I apologize if you hear this, is when you wake up in the morning, You have purpose.
Yeah.
So every person this morning that woke up, or if you're in Australia, the next morning, when you wake up, you have purpose. Dive purpose and influence into energy, how that all becomes, together.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing around purpose, living a purpose-led life, is the reason we're all looking for purpose, and I think there's over 100,000 books on Amazon on purpose, is the first layer above purpose is we're looking for meaning. We're looking for meaning in my life. Yeah, what's the meaning? What's the significance? And the reason we're looking for meaning, is because when we have purpose and meaning, we can fully live life. If you look at a person who has a purpose-led life, they're fully living. This is where the passion comes. So for any of the listeners, I really invite you to reflect on this. At some level, we are all always on purpose. If I'm living a purpose-led life, what I'm wanting to do is to fully live my life. And one of the distinctions I work with my clients is it's not about doing what brings you joy. It's about bringing joy to what you do. You get to choose each morning. Are you grateful? Are you thankful? Are you doing some reflection? Are you leaning into your children with gratitude, with your beloved, with what you have? And then you start to live a full life, and you realize that, as you so beautifully put, the highest purpose is to be of service. Yet to get there, it's about, how do I bring joy? How do I bring passion? Because that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for.
Bodhi, I'm laughing because you're so awesome, but I'm thinking that what you just said, when you're in a grocery store and that person's screaming at the manager, get more clerks. It's taking too long. They're not serving.
Yep.
But the joy would be, hey, manager, how can I help? What can I do? It looks like you're short-staffed. I'm joyfully trying to help you. And it's not joy, happy joy. I love that. An audience, pick that up. That is huge. You have to be joy, and you have to serve yourself first. Presence. You can't serve. Together we serve. That's why it says together. But you got to start with me, and you got to start with Bodhi, and you got to be able to serve and have the love and joy and presence.
Yeah.
This is a question. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, that serving yourself first. So, when we start to get more connected and more present with ourselves, you start to notice. So we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and most of them are negative. So the inner critic, the self-talk, I'm not good enough, the self-judgment, I'm not this, I'm not that. One of the threads you'll notice when you start to create more reflection and silence and prayer and presence is if someone came to lunch every day and spoke to me the way I talk to myself, I probably wouldn't have them back. And so you've got to start to be gentle with yourself. You've got to notice these thoughts. Your life is a reflection of the conversation you have with yourself. And a lot of that is subconscious. So, getting more present, you notice these, and again, this journey from fear to love, this journey from the inner critic to the inner lover, however you phrase that, serving yourself is serving your true self, being compassionate, loving your true self, and noticing those fearful stories that, we all have, and we start to let go of. And then you can be more present, more compassionate for self, and serve whoever's in front of you, the grocery store. I love that example.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's thousands, like you said, about purpose. There's millions of books on leadership, millions of talks about leadership, all those TEDx talks, speakers, and it's all great. But what do you think leadership is? Because what I heard the stat was people study, like 100% of people that read leadership books, 13% retain the information. So we got 87% of people out there not being true leaders after they've been educated. To you, what is leadership to make it right?
Yeah. And as I mentioned, the simplest definition, if you want to cut through all the books of leadership, is influence. whether it's a sporting team, whether it's a parent, whether it's a business. Yeah. And there are formal and informal leaders. And again, if we jump into the topic of leadership and influence, just to remind the listeners, there's self-leadership, relational leadership, and systemic leadership. Self-leadership essentially is, how am I showing up today? Am I being of service? Am I being compassionate with myself? Am I being present and connected with myself and with other? Relational leadership, the studies are really clear. So when you're in a relationship, whether it's your child, your beloved, a staff member, energetically, the most effective leaders create a safe container in that relationship. There's a lot of studies now around psychological safety, emotional safety. That comes from presence and vulnerability from the leader. So think about any relationship you're in, one-on-one or small group. Yeah. How am I influencing as a leader? How do I influence that? Yeah. And what we know is that successful relationships, communication, again, starts with the communication you have with yourself. So many of the leadership books are about communicating better with the other person, active listening and all of that, all very useful. Yet again, the communication and relationship you have with yourself, the self-talk, the emotional awareness, the energetic presence. And systemic leadership, so anyone who's married with children, or in a relationship with children, we have created a system there, a constellation, and you're influencing that every day. So self-leadership, the relational leadership, often individual, but also what's happening in the system. And when I work with business leaders in the systemic work, the systems thinking and the systemic work, as a leader, often what happens is the system, the business, the family, the community, there are things that are going on in there which you could say are the symptoms. But as a leader, it's about getting to the cause. Connecting systemically. What's going on here? Why is this showing up? And to do that, and again, we'll jump into what the masculine and feminine energy mean, because, just to repeat myself, leadership's about influence. They're the different types of leadership. And then it's the connection and direction. That's what's effective in leadership. Does that make sense, Steve?
It makes a huge bunch of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Steve, English is my first language. I promise. Here's something that came to my head that I've never thought of before that you're so brilliant to bring out of me is, can I go as a leader and go to my people and communicate, am I really influencing you? Or whatever words, but that comes to me. It's like, have a team meeting, my managers go, hey, here's my first question.
Yep.
Am I influencing you? How am I influencing you? And how can I be better at influencing you? Is that a benefit? Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a saying in leadership around, the difference between influence and manipulation is intention. Yeah.
Interesting.
And the thread of your work of being of service, if that's your intention, as a leader, then I'm influencing the system from a place of service, a place of compassion, a place of love. And, some leaders do influence from a place of manipulation. I'm trying to manipulate the system to get my outcome. That's the old way of leadership. That's the old way of trying to, the intention is manipulation. And so again, the deeper cut for all of your listeners, I'm sure your listeners are very much, it's about, what's my intention here? Is my intention to serve this person? Is my intention to support this staff member, this client? Is my intention to influence this in a useful way? And absolutely, the question you ask is such a powerful one. The most effective cultures, have a robust feedback system. It's safe to give and receive feedback. Think about your marriage. Think about your parenting. Think about your system. I did a podcast recently, Steve. I have my own podcast, as you know, called True Freedom, on parenting teenagers. And I know you've been through this journey. And, in business, any of the listeners who are in particularly in corporate America, there's often these 360 reviews and, feedback and everything. What I said to my listeners who've got teenagers is, have you ever done a 360 review with your teenagers and got feedback about how you were showing up as a parent? Like, imagine the level of vulnerability and honesty, that you, as a servient parent, you and how, if you're willing, how you can grow and learn and go, how am I influencing this child? What's their experience of me as a father, as a mother, in the context of growth and learning and supporting, and I think it's any of the listeners, it's a powerful exercise. Just any of the listeners who've got children, teenage children, but the same in organizations and the same in marriages, Steve.
Yeah.
If you haven't got a feedback loop with your partner, then it's very tricky to grow, to learn, to develop, and, you've got to create that safe environment. I'm not saying it's easy. It's simple, but not easy. But feedback's important.
Most people grow with uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, growth is hard to come by. And it's interesting because some of the guests I've had on my podcast were military. And what they tell me, and this is amazing, he said the general who went over 50,000 troops came to all the colonel, the next level colonels, and said, I made a mistake. This could have killed 1,000 soldiers.
Yeah.
And then when Otis was his name. Oh, great. Shout out to Otis McGregor. I went, Otis, wait a minute. He told you that? He goes, yeah, I made a mistake. We did this, and this could have been the outcome. I just want to tell you all that.
Yeah.
What it told me, and I said on the podcast, if a general is going to tell people that 1,000 people die, because why not me be humble? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
I made a mistake. I didn't flush the toilet. I didn't put the dishes away. Or I didn't send the email out.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can pivot from these.
Yeah. The fastest way to create psychological and emotional safety in a relationship is through vulnerability. And that general was being vulnerable. And people get a bit confused about vulnerability, like it's not about spilling your beans about everything that's happening in life, but it's about authenticity. Again, you've had other guests talk about these themes, it's vulnerability is, can I be fully authentic with what I'm experiencing in this moment? Yeah. And in this moment, I have to acknowledge that, the general acknowledged that he made a mistake. The parent acknowledges that I could have done that differently. You do that in relationship, you've already automatically created a safer environment for the other person to step into truth. That creates it.
So what happens when I'm vulnerable, whatever situation, and people take advantage of that?
Yep.
Because it's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to others, everybody listening one time or another, right?
Yep. There's a couple of things. One of the things, and a lot of the female listeners would be aware of this, is one of the things I teach is what are healthy boundaries. Yeah. So again, vulnerability isn't about being a doormat. It's not about letting people walk over you. Yeah. You've got to understand what is a healthy boundary. Yeah. And how do I set boundaries? And the other key piece is, again, the way we process the world. So the way we process the world, one is at a thinking level. We analyze, we think about the world. The other is at an emotional level, our heart, we feel. And the third is at an intuitive level or a knowing level, our gut feel. And one of the things I teach people, Steve, leaders, parents, is when you get present with yourself, what's your gut telling you about this person? What's your gut telling you about this relationship? Because if you listen to that, and little children are good at this, if you listen to that, you're not going to be vulnerable with someone is going to take advantage of you. You're not going to be vulnerable and walked over in an inappropriate relationship. But you've got to trust your gut. Yeah. And that's essentially our navigation tool. Yeah. We've got the head, the heart, and the intuition, but the intuition and our feelings. Again, the example, particularly, our business world is very thinking led, it's kind of overvalued. You know, we don't go to university and they say, "What's your gut feel about this exam?" You know, it's like exactly. But you see your little 5-year-old in the playground, and he comes up and says, "I don't want to play with Johnny." You know, it's not. They don't have a spreadsheet and the analysis about Johnny. They just go, "It just doesn't feel right." Because they know, you know, whether Johnny's a bully or whatever's going on, it doesn't feel right. We all have that in us.
Yeah.
We all have that ability. And if you have that and set boundaries, then you know the safe place to be vulnerable, the relationships that are safe.
Yeah.
And you also know the ones, where it's not okay.
It's interesting. Animals are the same way. I'm a big dog lover. Dogs are the same way. They can sense people. They bark at some people and they don't bark at others. And that's very interesting. Well, we're coming to a little break here. Let's give Bodhi a break. We got a little special video I'm going to show. He doesn't even know I'm going to show it. But let's take a break. We'll be back in 5 to 8 minutes or so and come back and listen to more about this incredible Bodhi and how he just changed my life in about 30 minutes. We'll see you all in a minute.
The hero of our own life. And essentially, when men realize that they get to create the whole of their own reality and become the author of their life, being a hero doesn't necessarily mean climbing the Himalayas. It doesn't necessarily mean being a superstar. Yep. In Hindu philosophy, which talk a lot about the hero's journey, you know, we are born into a certain dharma. We're born into a certain life. And it's like, how do I lean into that? And I like to think of this aspect of the hero's journey that we cover is for the householders. It's the contemporary hero's journey for men, typically who are married, mortgage, business, children. How do I lean in and be the hero of my life, the hero to my beloved, the hero to my children, the hero to my employees? And one of the things we started this podcast series with is that there is a map. There is a map to being the best version of yourself. Yeah. And the map is the hero's journey. And the contemporary hero's journey, particularly for householders. Remember, the masculine, the deepest driver for the masculine is freedom. True freedom, which is what we're talking about. And that's the Holy Grail. So the hero sets off looking for the Holy Grail. So it's the freedom from suffering and reconnecting with our innate freedom, our innate essence, our innate joy, the truth of who we are. And then being of service from that place. Then the hero brings his gifts to the world. That's essentially what we're talking about. If we map the contemporary journey in the Western world, so most men, we're closest to the Holy Grail at 16 and at 45. And a lot of men the listeners may reflect at 16, often there's psychologists talk of the existential crisis. This questioning of who am I? What's it all about? That's because we're hearing the call, yet most of us resist the call. And that's a classic part of the hero's journey. We get a sense there's something else, but we deny it. We say no. And the classic in our 20s, again, these are huge generalizations, is for a lot of men in the Western world, we go looking for the Holy Grail outside of ourselves. And so that's when we go to India, we go meditate, we go climb the Himalayas, we go party, we go, exploring, whatever it might be. We're looking for the Grail outside ourselves. And there's a point on the hero's journey, when we hear the call and realize that the Holy Grail was inside us all along. The analogy is, we go looking for the Grail and realize it was at the bedside table all along.
Okay, so just to sort of double down on the idea of the call.
The call is when there's a point in a man's life when we know we're more than just our pinhead, just our thinking mind, just our ego. And often it occurs in nature. Often in nature as, young men or in our journey, and this isn't just for men, obviously, this is for all of us. But if I lean into the masculine, often in nature, there's a place where we just go, wow, there's something bigger going on. That's the call. That's the urge, the inquiry. And that's, using the Ken Wilber work, that's when we wake up. Yeah.
Right.
The 5 pillars on the hero's journey is there's the wake up, there's the clean up, there's the grow up, there's the show up, and there's the open up. And these aren't linear.
Yeah.
Remember, the journey's a spiral, yet these are great tools and context for the hero's journey. So for the listeners there, if you have heard the call, and the reason I love this work, Rich, is so many men are hearing the call at the moment.
Yeah.
They're realizing there's something more. They're waking up that they're more than their pinhead. They're more than their ego. Yeah. And this is when we move, in Joseph Campbell's language, from the ordinary to the extraordinary, from the mundane. Yeah. So many men are asleep. So many men have bought the myth that it's about just the grind. It's just, I've got to put up with this. I've got to pay the mortgage. I've got to go to work. I'm the victim. I'm at effect. Yet so many men are realizing, I'm the author of my life. It doesn't mean I leave my marriage or my children or my business. It just means I can experience it differently.
Very, very interesting how he talks about call, those 5 pillars. I hope you wrote them down. It's the little things in life like that if you make a change, again, being uncomfortable is important, how much better you're going to be as a person. And you know what? Let me be feminine once in a while. Why not? I think women are taking over the world in business. So let's stop right there and bring our guest back. Welcome back, Bodhi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nice.
Oh my gosh. What a great interview. I'm glad I picked that, because one thing you said a couple times is ego. And Mark Hunter, who was on my show, he says ego is empowering greater outcomes. Reaching levels, but empowering people to bring you as a leader, bring you along with yourself. There's one thing, I have no idea what this is. What does the embodied presence mean?
Beautiful. So embodied presence is a simultaneous, attuned awareness. So what I mean by that in the practices I teach, anybody who does reflection, mindfulness, prayer, contemplation, you start to create space between yourself and your thoughts. It's one of the entry points to presence. Mindfulness is so powerful, prayer. And so what happens is that the gateway to embodied presence is often one of those techniques, sitting in nature, when you're not in your thoughts, you're observing your thoughts. And embodied presence then is, how do I bring my attention? Remember, the biggest asset you have in life, and please hear this, listeners, the biggest asset you have as a leader, as a business owner, as a parent, is your attention. Where your attention goes, energy flows. If your attention's scattered, you'll be scattered. Your life will be scattered. Again, it's not good or bad, but mastering your attention. So embodied presence is not only noticing I'm not my thoughts, but how do I bring my attention into my body? And there are certain practices, grounded, and be present with the relationship in front of me, going back to leadership, my team, my business. And so it's the simultaneous. I can be connected with myself. I'm connected with you, Steve. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm attuned. I'm attuned to how I'm feeling. I'm attuned to what is going on for me, and I'm attuned to what's going on for you. And I'm aware. That's the embodied presence. I'm embodied. Mm-hmm. Does that give you some territory?
Oh yeah, embody. Yeah, they're not out of body and presence. Embodied. It's inside you, and that's where people will go. I know my wife's not feeling. Something's wrong with my wife. There's something. Back to intuition, which is presence inside you. So it's not that, but I get it, because we don't do that enough. We have so much going on in our life. The microwave society.
Yep.
Starts firing at us, TV show, this, that. You have an assistant because your schedule is just a mess in a good way. And I need to get one too because my schedule's everywhere. And, people out there that are so busy, it's just that way.
Yeah.
And speaking of busy, you have a podcast. I love podcasting. We've talked about it. I think it's such a cool way to be a thought leader, to serve people and things like that. I want to ask you this question. What do you think the best part of podcasting is for you?
The best part of it, did you say?
Yep, best part of podcasting.
Well, my sense is for you and for myself, it's being of service. Like for me, again, if we dive into purpose, there's inner purpose, outer purpose, and higher purpose. And again, if you map that through the hero's journey, and so the inner purpose, is getting to know yourself, dealing with some of the stuff, going back to the cleanup. We've all got to do it. We can deny it, we can resist it, but we know, the psychology's there, the emotional intelligence is there. We carry a bit of baggage. We've got a backpack from our childhood. You want to keep adding to that backpack, or do you want to kind of unpack it a little bit? And that's the inner purpose of life. We've got to clean up a little bit of stuff. It's not good or bad. It's not, you have to, spend years in therapy, although that can help. The outer purpose is what's in front of me now. Yeah. We're living a purpose-led life is what's my outer purpose now? My marriage, my mortgage, my kids, my business. And the higher purpose, and more people who once you integrate your inner purpose, outer purpose, the higher purpose is how can I truly be of service? What is my soul's real calling? Yeah, and that's the beauty of things like podcasts, because we can get to a much bigger audience. And the other piece I love with podcasts, including our conversations, is you provoking me through your presence and questioning responses and thoughts that I may not be conscious of, and vice versa. And so I'm a big fan of relationship, conversation, intimacy, So, and I think for the listeners, they get to feel it's not some scripted monologue about a topic. It's live, it's real. It's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought of that, Steve. That's a great question. I love that interaction.
Yeah. It's fantastic. What's the name of your podcast?
True Freedom.
True Freedom.
Yeah, it's on all the platforms. Yeah.
All the platforms. What am I going to hear when I listen to your podcast?
What you're going to hear is, so one of my colleagues, Richard Stokes, who you just saw on that clip. So that was an extract from one of our podcasts. And essentially, we're just starting our 4th series, I think. We cover everything. And the podcast was designed for any of the listeners there who are, men, early 40s to mid 50s. Yeah, married, mortgage, business, kids. Yeah, because again, how do I navigate that? In the US, how do I navigate this life? Because so many men have got lost. They've got lost in the busyness, the pressure, the cost of living and things. So you're going to hear things about parenting. You're going to hear things about the masculine and feminine energy. You're going to hear things about being a leader. You're going to hear things about marriage, relationship, how to create more intimacy. So there's plenty of things there. And, we dive deeper into the masculine and feminine energy as well in you, in your relationships and in your business.
Yeah. You must be saying some great things. Your dog's barking, talking to you.
Yes.
So you're saying good things. And I love the dog barking. So audience, this is a TV show, but it's real live TV show. And I love it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a selfish question. You gave it to me, but I get asked this all the time because I'm doing business with the Servant's Heart podcast tied to leadership. This question here, what are to you the 4 biggest mistakes leaders make?
Yeah, it's a big question. And if I reflect on, my clients, my own journey, the first one I'd say is to lose touch with yourself. And again, I know we're talking specifically about leaders in a typical sense, leading your business, entrepreneur, leading your organization. But generally, one of the biggest things I see with people is that they lose touch with their essential self. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about the ego. So there's the healthy ego and the unhealthy ego. The healthy ego is about self. It's about boundaries. It's about connection with self. The unhealthy ego is about fear, and it's about domination and those sorts of things. So the first is, losing touch with yourself. And one of the fastest ways to get back in touch with yourself is nature. As I've mentioned, spend some time in nature. The second is that leaders who think they've got to do it all themselves. And so true leaders create leaders. And the ability to delegate, the ability to empower, the ability to collaborate, particularly for men, is such a powerful leadership tool. So if you think you've got to have all the answers, if you think you've got to do it all yourself, that's going to come at a cost. The next mistake I would say is not understanding the masculine and feminine energy. And again, we haven't had a lot of time to cover that yet. And a simple summary of that. So the masculine and feminine energy isn't about gender, although most men are more in their masculine and most women are more in their feminine. And traditional cultures have known through the universe, through the planet, there are these energies that run, which we call the masculine, feminine, the yin and yang, whatever you want to label them. And they're totally different wiring. They communicate differently. They make decisions differently. They relate differently. And when I work with leaders in organizations, particularly the men, they don't understand what's going on for the feminine energy in themselves and in some of their team. And it's a huge mistake. Essentially, we're losing 50% of the resource in our organization because we're often stuck in the masculine and the hypermasculine. And then the fourth mistake I would say, which is similar, and we touched on it before, is it's not just I don't have to do it all myself, but am I willing to be vulnerable and ask for help? Am I really willing to go, like the general you mentioned, somebody in such an incredible role was willing to acknowledge the mistake. So again, I would say that's a mistake that leaders make, is that it's not okay to be vulnerable. I've got to have all my stuff together all the time. I've got to have all the answers.
Yeah, it's not the case. People respect you more when you're humble and say, I made a mistake. I say it in my podcast, hosts have correct me all the time, and it's great. And one thing you mentioned about nature, now I'm in my office all the day, and my wife, you got to get out. And I did it yesterday. I just got out, laid with the dog, sat outside in the backyard. You're not saying somebody has to go climb a mountain. If you want to, you can. Just get out in the sun or the rain or whatever. That's what you're saying. Get out in the air.
Yep.
I came back, had the rest of the day was I just realized that as you were talking, my day was so much better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start doing that.
Exactly. They did some studies on leadership, and they got leaders to map their behavior for a month. So they literally logged everything they did for the day. And what they found at the end of it is that the most effective leaders had a daily reflective practice. And that reflection was often through nature, through like just sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, reflecting, being in stillness, being in silence. And, for any of the listeners, if you don't have, and it's 5 or 10 minutes a day, this isn't some huge thing, but in the morning or the evening, and some of them, the leaders had both, but just in the morning, are you having time to reflect? Yep. How am I wanting to show up today? Am I being of service today? What are the meetings today? Yep. What's going on for me today? Did I get triggered because the kids didn't get ready for school and I'm going to take that to work? And so 5 or 10 minutes a day of reflection, stillness, and the back garden. In energetic studies, our natural state. So nature vibrates at a certain megahertz. There's a certain frequency. And our natural state is that frequency. That's why when we're in nature, our whole nervous system settles down, our energetic system settles down. And so that's the power of nature. That's why I ask any of the listeners, your back garden, if you've been for a walk in the forest, you know, if you've been to the beach, you automatically start to feel a little bit more calmer.
And I put free meditations up, audience. I'm going to jump on it. I like to find new ways to meditate, and you can jump on that. We got a few minutes left. I know it's not completely enough to talk about masculine and feminine energy, but talk about that as much as you can in a few minutes. I know there's a whole show about it, but leadership is so important. You covered so many, which is tied to this. So talk about a little bit about this.
Yeah. So if you think about the masculine and feminine energy, again, going back to nature, the universe, traditional cultures, what's been labeled the feminine energy, and again, this isn't about gender, is everything that flows, everything that moves. So it's like the ocean. Yeah. It can be wild, it can be calm, it can be stormy. It's like the river. Yeah. And the masculine energy is that which presences the feminine. So it's like the mountain. A great example is the feminine is the river and the masculine is the riverbanks. And it's the same in us. The feminine energy in us, is the key driver of the feminine energy is connection and love, connection and love, connection and love. There's a part of us that is constantly wanting to experience connection. Yeah, remember, connection and direction are leadership tools. Now, you know, most women are more in that feminine energy. There's a key desire for connection in relationship, in communication. And the flip of that, the masculine energy is linear, it's logical, it's strategic, it's about direction. Yeah. And so I can be more in my masculine energy and access my feminine and masculine traits. So there's a difference between our energy and our traits. If we think of the feminine traits of compassion, collaboration, community, connection, complexity, they're all traits that I can access from my masculine energy. And I can also access the masculine traits of strategy, of logic, of linear, those future thinking. And so one of the big distinctions, and particularly for any of the female leaders or female business owners listening, is how can I stay in my feminine energy if you're more in your feminine energy, but still access some of these masculine traits and feminine traits? The lioness, if you come close to the cubs of the lioness, she's going to roar, she's going to be in her power, but she's still a lioness. And so, you know, and this is mastery in organizations, leaders who can access those different traits. Because a lot of female leaders think they've got to become more masculine, and they're exhausted because they've disconnected from their life force, they've disconnected from their feminine energy. And encourage them to realize you can have masculine traits and stay in your feminine. And as you mentioned before, Steve, for yourself, you've got a big heart. You're a man, you're a strong man, and you can have empathy, you can have compassion, you can have nurturing. I see you with your dogs. It's just like this big, cuddly, you know, beautiful man, but you're still in your masculine, you know, and that's all I'm talking about, connection and direction.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you nailed it. And you gave me a lot when I met you back last year. More of it's okay to cry. It's okay to show emotion. Doesn't make you less masculine. And being feminine, because you're masculine, doesn't make you less feminine. I'm glad you're able to get that in time. So reach out to Bodhi here, LinkedIn. He's the best place to get a hold of him. Real quick question. I've reserved the Learjet for you. There's 4 seats. You're in one of the seats. Who are the other 3 people you're going to invite, dead or alive, and where are you flying?
Yeah, wow. When Mandela comes up, you know,
okay.
Dalai Lama comes up, definitely. You know, I've got to have a spot for my wife, or I'll be in trouble.
That's a great plane ride right there, my friend. That is great.
Exactly. And I think for me, we'd be flying to the epicenter of where we can make the most impact. And I know at the moment in the US, there's a lot of change and a lot of turmoil. I'm coming over in May to speak at a conference about the future of male leadership, you know, because for me and for all the listeners, it's, you know, how do I, you know, it's that whole thing, you know, if you're not part of the change, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
You know, and so for me, you know, I would go wherever I can make the most impact, you know, in leadership, in business, in community.
Well, we're going to end the show there, and I'm going to drive into my feminine side and say, and I mean this, I love you, Bodhi. I love what you're doing. Seriously, from my heart. And men, you can say love to men all day. It doesn't matter, even in business. Thank you. You're a blessing. And audience, reach out to him if you have questions about, if you need a speaker. If I was doing an event, he'd be my number one speaker. And then Tony Robbins and Dalai Lama and Nelson. No, I'm half kidding, but he'd be right up there with all of them. And with that being said, we'll see all of you on the next episode, which will be Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Got to work on my time zones. Next Friday, Together We Serve TV show. We have another fabulous guest. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, listeners.